Hi everyone, my name is Matthias. I'm a concept artist from Belgium, working in entertainment, mainly video games and marketing. We'll be going over Marvelous Designer for concept art. Let's get the formalities out of the way. Thank you for buying this Gamma tutorial. I hope you enjoy. You can contact me if you have any issues with technical stuff. Just message me on Facebook. If you want to get a quick review of the piece you're doing, just email me or contact me on Facebook and I'll take a quick look. So let's jump into it. I've listed the 5 software packages we'll be using today. You can see it's DAZ 3D, where we will be making a short animation for our pose that we can import in Marvelous Designer to work on top of and generate some clothing. ZBrush is just to sculpt on top of this, and Keyshot to render, Photoshop to compile everything. It's a pretty straightforward workflow. It's the exact same workflow I use for fantasy stuff, but we'll be creating a sport kind of sci-fi looking character today. I like to think of these as 3 big steps. As you look at any design, you can basically split them up into 3 big things: the large, medium, and small shapes. I like to do all the large shapes in Marvelous, ZBrush for medium, and Photoshop for the small shapes. But before we jump into any of these softwares, we'll be taking a look at references. I've compiled a quick list of references I like to look at, just so you have something to search in Pinterest or Google Images. All of these are incredible. The first 2 are 2 of my favorite fashion designers. The second are just clothing lines. You can look at clothing stores online, get some cool references. You can even buy them if you want. And then the last 2 are 2 of my favorite catwalk shows. Dolce & Gabbana, I'm sure you've heard of. They created an incredible catwalk show in the fall of 2006. But the cool thing is you can just change fall to winter or 2006 to any year, and you'll come up with a collection of amazing designs that all kind of fit together. So once you get inspired, you jump into sketching. This particular piece is a personal piece, so I can get away with pretty ugly sketches. These are super fast, like not even 5 minutes for the sketch. It's sketched on top of a quick render in DAZ, just so I don't have to think about anatomy and can just focus on design, and just crank out, I like to do 3 to 4 sketches and then jump into my software packages. On the right is the final design. It's not a final illustration, but it's a final design. As you can see, it goes pretty far away from the initial sketches in terms of design. I never really like to stick to the sketches I made when it's a personal project. I kind of always question when I'm working on it, see if it still looks good, and never be a slave to my initial sketch. When you work with clients, it's kind of a different game. You might want to debate, or might take some extra time on the sketches so you have something that you're really happy with. For this tutorial, we will be using this sketch. You guys know what the end result looks like. I don't, which is pretty weird to think about. But this is the initial thing. You guys can see if it looks anything like the design we end up with, but I'm pretty sure we will be changing the color because I'm not a big fan of these. They're kind of placeholder. We might even change it to the yellow and green that I have here. And then this stupid Pirates of the Caribbean meme. It's just don't be a slave to your sketch. Kind of look at what you're working with and see what could fit. So yeah, let's jump into DAZ. Okay, so as you can see, we're in DAZ right now. I'm using the city limits user interface. We'll be going over just the basics of the UI for the people who aren't familiar with this. If you go to Windows, go to Workspace, select Layout, and just select city limits, and you'll have something that looks like this. Press accept, and then you'll have it. Now, DAS is a free software, but you can buy some add-ons like different figures, clothing, and all that stuff. I've bought some figures. I have Victoria 7 HD, which is a Genesis 3 model, which has some problems when we go to Marvelous, but we'll fix it, and I'll show you later. Now, if you don't have access to Victoria 7 HD, you can use just the default Genesis 1 and 2 that come with DAS for free. Now, we have smart content on the left and parameters on the right. These are the two main tabs I use. Now, once we loaded in a figure, I like to immediately open my Animate Light, which is in Windows Paint and then Animate Light. In some versions, for some reason, it doesn't have the Animate Light tab, and you'll have to use a timeline, which works exactly the same way. I'm not sure why they removed it, but that's just the case. Now, what this does is, if we move anything from the body, let's just quickly drag and make something. We'll have an animation that goes from our T-pose, which is the base pose, to the animation, to the pose we made. And this will become really important when we jump to Marvelous. But let's quickly reset this back to the T-pose. And again, you can buy some poses from the DAS store. Most of them look pretty bad, but it's good to use as a base. So if you selected your model, you can go to poses and just select a pose. You can make them yourself too, just by clicking on different body parts, going to parameters, and then just wiggle them around and get a pose you like. You can also just, like I showed you, drag stuff around, which mostly ends up as a creepy looking pose, so I don't really advise using that. Now there's one more option when you want to pose stuff, is you can just click it and go to pose control, also in the parameters, and you can do stuff like this. It goes for every single body part there is, and it's pretty handy. But let's just stick to one of the base poses. I'm not sure if we need to change anything. Let's quickly have a look. Everything looks sort of decent, and let's just stick to this one. Alright, so we have a animation of our T-pose to the pose we want, as you can see. So let's quickly export this one. We'll have to make two files that we export from this. Let's quickly have a look where I saved everything. So let's make a new map. Go Marvelous. Pose. So that was the FBX, I guess. I'm not too sure. Yeah, no, that was the OBJ. So we need one OBJ. Let's quickly go over it again. Yes. And you can see, I suggest to just copy these and then match every export kind of stuff, because sometimes if you change a few things, the textures will get messed up inside Keyshot, or the animation won't work, or just copy them and make sure this one is to 100%, which is pretty important. So yeah, accept, save this one as OBJ, and we'll also save one as an FBX. It's called Autodesk FBX. So So let's call this pose animation. And save this. Again, just copy these, which will be your best option. Make sure morphs are off because that will screw up the animation. That's one thing I learned from experience. So yeah, just accept, and we have everything we need from DAS. Just to be sure, we'll save this as a DAS scene. So if something goes wrong, we always have this file to get back to. So yeah, let's jump into Marvelous. Okay, so right now we're in Cinema 4D, which I did not mention in the beginning. This is just because it will only take like 10 seconds or something. For some reason, Marvelous Designer doesn't like Genesis 3 models that come from DAS. And we will be using the FBX model that we saved from DAS. Now, what's wrong with it in Marvelous is the animation doesn't work. But luckily, there's a quick fix for this. You just open your FBX file or pose animation in Cinema 4D. You can also use 3ds Max. I suppose you can use Maya or Modo or any of your 3D packages. As you can see, our animation does work here, and we just export it as FBX again, and that'll fix the issue. I don't know why it fixes it, and it's such a stupid thing. I mean, this isn't the case with Genesis 1 and 2. It'll directly work in Marvelous, but Genesis 3 we need to do this, import FBX and export, and that'll fix your issues. Okay, let's have a quick recap of what you should have at the moment. So you should have one OBJ of your post character. You can check it, just open the file. Is it post or is it still T-pose? If it's still a T-pose, go back to DAS, see that you're exporting the OBJ when you're at the end of your timeline where your post character is, and just export it there. And we should also have a FBX, which is the full animation. If you use Genesis 3, we just exported it from Cinema, so it works in Marvelous. You'll also have 3 maps. This will be our texture files from the OBJ, and then the texture files from the FBX. And that should be all you have at the moment. Okay, so we're finally in Marvelous. After we did all the preparation work and getting our animation ready, we can finally get into the main program. Now I'll be doing a quick rundown of all the features I use in Marvelous, and then we'll start making our sketch that I made before the tutorial. But yeah, let's first jump into the UI. This always opens when you open the program. Just delete everything, select it, and you can also delete the avatar. So right now we have an empty workspace. This is our 3D workspace, and this is our 2D workspace. At the sides you'll see a bunch of fabrics. These are the ones from the dress we just deleted. You shouldn't be looking at them. You can just delete them if you want, or you can leave them there. Now how do we get our FBX into Marvelous? We just go to File, Import, FBX. Let's quickly search for the files. Alright, so we have our FBX. We import it, and this is the first really important thing. The scale will kinda decide how detailed your fabric will, and how elegant the folds look. I like to use something between 2500 and 5000. Now the higher you go with scale, the slower the simulation will be. So if you're on a tight deadline, I suggest you go to 2500 or even lower. Just know that the folds will look a bit more clunky and less elegant. The higher you go, the more frustrating it will be to work in, and the longer it will take to simulate all the clothing. So for this video, let's just say 2500. Most of the clothing I do it at 5000, but that's if you have all the time in the world. So yeah, let's press OK. It'll import your FBX, and you'll lose all the textures, which doesn't really matter inside Marvelous. So as you can see, we have our T-pose right now, and we are in the simulation windows of Marvelous. As you go right here, we'll be able to go to animation. Let's check real quick if our animation works, and it does. Perfect. And let's set it back to here. Now back to simulation. The first thing you might want to do is just press right click and go to simulation properties. What we will do here is make sure the program runs optimal, and we can set the number of CPU cores that it will use to calculate our simulation. I have an 8-core CPU, so let's say I go for 7 cores because I'm also recording and running some programs in the background. But you can go to 8 cores if you have 8, you can go to 16 if you have 16, and it will run really smoothly. Now, some cool stuff you can do here as well is, if for example you have a scene in space, like something from Gravity or The Martian, I don't know, you can change the gravity, which is most of the time you just keep it to default, but if you have some outer space stuff, it can be cool to play with this. Now another thing is, if you don't want to work with triangles and you only want to work with quads, you can change the quads here. But I mean, for our workflow and in concept art, it doesn't really matter. Now the next thing I like to do is go to preferences, and go to simulation quality. It's set on normal by default, but I changed it to complete, and it will save you a bunch of headaches with some seams like colliding with each other and just doing nasty stuff that we don't want. So just set it to complete. It will take a bit longer, but it's worth it, and it will save you a lot of headaches. So that's the first thing. Now some other things you can do here is you can show light controller. You can see, because our model is white because we lost the textures, you can change the light so it isn't as overexposed as it is. I don't really care, but it can be kind of annoying. Next thing is a cool thing. It's a wind controller. So if you press this arrow, you can say activate wind, press on, and then you can change like how heavy of a wind there is, and it can be cool for some really like action poses or poses that are outside and you want some more dynamic wind that goes through the clothing. But we won't be using it today, but just know that it's there and it's pretty useful. So let's just go back and get the wind controller off. Okay, so now we will be looking at the fabric window. You can see it has the default fabric in it, and the V mark says it's active right now, so any piece of cloth you draw will have this fabric to it. If we click on it, we can change some of the properties. You can of course change the color, you can even add a texture or do anything with it. But the big thing you want to look at here is the preset of the physical properties. As you know, in real life, for example, jeans doesn't behave the same way as a windbreaker, for example, or as some silky kind of cloth. So these kind of like emulate the way clothing behaves, and you'll have to try these ones out, and you'll see how they behave and how they react to each other, and they all really feel like they should. So, for example, you can have a leather belt versus a windbreaker, which behaves completely different. My favorite ones are the denim, default, and windbreaker. So yeah, this is pretty important. You can of course add multiple, say which one is active, copy, and all that stuff. But let's just leave to the default one, which is pretty good. Now, the main tools in Marvelous we'll be looking at are at the top right here. You'll be able to draw out some fabric, sew stuff together, add some dots to make the sewing easier, cut some holes in it, and the main two are these. So for a rectangle, if you just drag out a rectangle right now, you'll see it happens in 2D and 3D. In 3D we can of course move it around like any 3D software. If we place it on top of the head, the spacebar is the shortcut for stimulate, or we can press this arrow. You'll see it fall on top of our model. Now it's going pretty slow at the moment because I'm also recording and having a bunch of pretty heavy programs running in the background, but it should go pretty smoothly depending on your setup. So this is just the real basic stuff. Drag a rectangle and drop it on top of a model, but this is not exactly what we want. The first thing I don't like about this is that our piece of clothing is just flat. It doesn't have any thickness to it. So if we click on it, you can see in the property editor under simulation properties you can add thickness by collision and by rendering. So what it does is, well, it basically says what it does. So how thick it will collide and for the simulation, and how thick it will look when you look at it. So as you can see, it has no thickness when we look at it, and it has 0, 0. So if we change it to 2, for example, you'll see that it has some thickness. If you don't see any thickness in your viewport, it's because this is probably still on the no thickness. If you change it to thickness, it'll look like it's supposed to look. Alright, so let's delete this one and let's get into some sewing. Now, the very basics of sewing is just draw stuff on top of your model. Hold shift if you want to go horizontal or vertical, just like in Photoshop. So once we have this one, we'll be making like a super fast shirt or something. You can of course drag the points around. Now what you have to think about is that we only see the front view of our model in the 2D editor. Now in the 3D we can see that a human has some depth to it. So this piece of clothing has to cover both the front and the depth of the human. And that's why this will always look a lot bigger than what we see in the 2D representation. So let's give it some more depth. You'll get a really good feel of how deep you need to go once you get a little bit used to working in Marvelous. Now this straight line will not look good when we simulate and sew it together with our other pieces. So we want it to be like a little bit curved, and you can do it by pressing this tool right here. This will give it a little bit of a curve to it. So this will go down. If you think about the clothing in front and depth, this will go down in front, and this will be the depth of our clothing. Now for the color, we'll just make it a little bit like this, and then of course we want it to be the exact same thing on the other side. So the way we mirror things is just by clicking the seam we want, press unfold, and we'll have this thing. Now we also want the same one for the back, so we just press Ctrl C, Ctrl V for Windows, and Command C, Command V for Mac. So now we have the front and the back. Let's move the back to the back. And now we need to sew these two together before we can simulate. If we simulate now, it just falls to the ground. So these tools are for sewing. So if you press it, we can just easily sew these together. As you can see, you just have to connect the sides together. The back of this one will be too deep, so let's just quickly make it how we want it to be. So we want it to be like the exact same for both sides, so let's quickly delete this and press unfold again. And we probably have to redo some sewing, yeah. Okay, let's add some thickness to it again, and now we simulate the whole thing. Now as you can see, like some of the stuff doesn't really look that good, but that's a nice thing. We can always go back and drag some stuff around to really make it fit in our 2D window. Okay, so let's press spacebar again so it stops simulating, and we'll have a quick look around. So yeah, it doesn't look perfect, but let's just say it looks alright for now. Now some cool things I'd like to show you is what happens when you sew two things together that aren't the same length. So let's quickly sew something on this. So this has stopped simulating right now, so we don't need it to do anything for the moment. So if we just select it, press right click and freeze, so it just stays like it is right now. But let's quickly add something to this just to show you what different lengths will look like when we sew them together. Let's give it some thickness again, and let's press spacebar. So it's taking a while, but you can kind of start seeing what's happening. Let's quickly stop simulating. It'll give this like really nice crumpled up effect, and as you can see, the folds kind of look wobbly, and there's something wrong with it, but you don't have to think about this until you start exporting. You kind of just have to look at the big picture and don't worry about those squiggly lines. It's all gonna be okay. So let's delete this again. Let's quickly unfreeze these. And let's say we want to sew something like right on our belly. We don't have any lines we can sew to, so that's why these red icons are for. These are inner sewings, so we can just say we want to sew something right here, and you can see it already on your 3D representation where it's gonna be. You can do the same thing by just pressing somewhere, and you'll see the blue dot appear on the 2D representation. So if you want something to be placed exactly somewhere in the 3D pane, you can just click it and see where you want to start sewing. So we have this inner line right now. Let's quickly make a rectangle like this and do something like a kangaroo. Okay, let's have a look. Like, it doesn't look that good now. We also forgot to give it a thickness. But yeah, this is the way you sew stuff together inside of big pieces of clothing. Alright, so that's kind of it for techniques that I use like right now. This will all be what you want it to be. There's two more things I sometimes use. This is just to add a dot to something, which can be pretty handy, and this is free sewing. So if you want, for example, these two sides to be sewn to one side, you can just say okay, and I want this as well. No, wait, this isn't how it works. Yeah, this is. So now you can have these two sides sewn to one side. And this is all there is really to it. We'll be jumping into the actual design that I sketched, and we'll tackle a bunch of problems. And we'll get something close to finished inside Marvelous, so let's get on to it. So for this next part, I thought instead of just going over stuff we already talked about, it's just using the same techniques. I was thinking about maybe doing a little talk about design and how I think about it. And first of all, I like to say there are millions of different ways to look at design. For example, function is one of the better ways to think about design, in my opinion. The one I like to talk about today is contrast. And the first thing we think about when we think of contrast is usually not in design, it's more in values. I mean, black and white is the biggest contrast in values. Color, like you have the color spectrum, just go opposites, that's contrast in color. And shapes, if you have a row of like all squares, and suddenly there is a circle in it that's kind of conscious in shapes. But there's one that I like to think of in design, and that's called, for example, subject. I have a few things in pop culture that I think are very good thought about when it comes to contrast in subject. And the first one I like to talk about is The Last of Us. It both has contrast in its characters and its environment. Its environment, for example, it's a beautiful decay. It's the end of the world, and it looks beautiful at the same time. So there's kind of like all these buildings are crumbling, and at the same time there are plants that are starting to grow. So you have both the end of something, that is the buildings, and the beginning of new life, which is a beautiful contrast to play with. The next thing in The Last of Us is the clickers. They have this beautiful floral design to them, and they're also like a combination of undead and like dead people. So it's beautiful, and they also have some glow to them in the dark. So it's beautiful and creepy at the same time, which is again kind of the same contrast you have in the environment. And I don't want to spoil anything of The Last of Us story, but for the people that have played it, you can see a lot of contrast in their personalities. Like the bad guy is usually bad, is the good guy really good. You have Ellie, the little girl, who is a total badass, which is a contrast in her character that works so well in the game itself. Now in film we have one of the most famous concept artists ever, H.R. Geiger or Giger, I never know how to say it, but he's a German concept artist who primarily worked on the alien design, and it's classed as biomechanical design, so it's a contrast between man-made stuff and factory-looking design and biological, like animals, and it creates a beautiful design, which we also see in The Last of Us. Again, we have the man-made stuff, which are the cities, and the biological, which are these plants growing on top of them and breaking them down. And something we see a lot in concept art lately, especially if you go on ArtStation, is these cyborg and cyberpunk looking designs. So you have the hard surface, kind of man-made stuff combined with humans, and you have these mechanical limbs, which also create a cool contrast between biological and mechanical stuff. Now, how do we take this to clothing, and how do we think of contrasting clothing when we're not planning on doing any mechanical stuff? As I said in the beginning, we can think of it again with values in colors. So we can have opposite colors, we can have warm and cold colors. Of course we can use black and white clothing, but there's one thing I like to use a lot is its shapes and size. So for this design we're doing kind of a bodysuit, like skin tight, something like you would see a surfer wear, and something that is very baggy, like street clothing. So it creates a cool contrast between this very well fitted clothing and these baggy looking sports clothing, which I think works really well. And then in terms of material, you can obviously go for leather and maybe something less reflective. So if you can combine reflective clothing with matte clothing, it'll create cool contrast between those two. And I think it's important as an artist to just deconstruct everything you see and build it back up with your own taste and visual language. So instead of just copying, like for example what you see in The Last of Us, just break it down to its original idea, and you can do it by deconstructing it to what I like to do is the contrast, or you can deconstruct it to its function. There's again a billion different ways to look at design. So for example, if you would look at The Last of Us, you would just deconstruct it to the combination of life and death and build it back up again. I think, I don't know if too many people know it, but what Destiny did with their Rise of Iron expansion, they made some destroyed buildings, and they made some kind of like alien veins, like these red glowing veins, grow over them, and in these red veins there are these geometrical kind of mechanical looking shapes. So we have a combination of three different things, which is the deconstructed building, which is man-made. We have the alien kind of veins, which look very organic, and in these veins we have something again like very industrial looking, and it works very well. And it's kind of the same idea as The Last of Us, but broken down to what its core is, and built back up with their own visual language, and it fits perfectly into their universe, which is again a beautiful contrast between fantasy and sci-fi, which also could be seen as opposites of one coin. If you look at their armors and character design, they all feel kind of like fantasy characters. Like some just straight up look like a mage or a warrior, but they're filtered through the taste of the artist, and through this futuristic kind of filter. So it creates this like familiar but very strange looking thing at the same time, and it instantly became iconic in my opinion. The same goes for their creature, also fit perfectly in this idea, just the combination of fantasy creatures but made kind of more alien and kind of more futuristic. Another thing I like to mention is all of these things I gave you is all out of pop culture and out of the industry that we actually work in, so all movies or video games. But as I said, you kind of have to break it down and build it back up with your own voice. And the way you build your own voice is not by looking at video games or movies or other people's concept art. I like to obviously look at fashion and those things. But when you can bring in other art forms into concept art, you will create your own voice. And everyone still is developing their own voice, of course. That'll never stop. But if you just keep looking at concept art, you will have the same voice that most people from the concept art industry have, but you will lack the other influences they have. It's really obvious that everyone that works in concept art loves concept art, but if you are the guy that loves concept art plus fashion design plus graphic design plus all these other things, you will be so much more valuable than just the guy that loves concept art. And I'm kind of the perfect guy to tell you. I used to just copy every single artist that I loved, and the only artists that I loved were in concept art. If you look at my older stuff, like most of it, I deleted, or they're not even online. But I did those Last of Us pieces that most people did back in the day, and I did make some of these like almost Michiko Ciara fan arts. But I started developing this more fashion influenced designs a couple months ago, and since then I feel like I'm first of all having much more fun making this, because you're not really trying to be someone else, and you'll never be as good as them. You'll kind of like just competing with yourself and trying to get better for you instead of trying to get as good as someone else. And I've also been getting a lot more responses on online, just on ArtStation, Facebook. And this is also why I'm making this video, by the way, just because of some of you guys been asking for the techniques, and that's kind of cool, because even though people are curious about the technique, once I throw this into the world, everyone that bought it will know the technique, and then it kind of comes down to the design and and the execution. And if you just, all these techniques are just so we can show other people's our vision of something. This is why people hire you. It's because they kind of want to build something, but they don't have the capabilities of showing people what their vision is. Or sometimes you of course have to work with their vision and kind of combine it with your own vision. But that's why I think most of us learned how to draw and learned how to paint, because we had ideas, and we wanted to show everything. And now, because we have this CG focused industry, we can show it in a bunch of different ways. We can use 3D, we can photo bash, we can just paint, and you kind of want to learn how to do all these things, but you can never forget why you're doing it. You're not making a cool photo bash piece to show people how good you are at photo bashing. You kind of just wanna use photo bashing to show other people your cool vision that you think is worth sharing. I kind of want to get back into what I'm doing inside Marvelous, and as you see, I'm kind of dragging stuff around. You can just click and drag to just drag clothing around, and I'm making a hoodie at the moment. These are pretty tricky to make. The best thing you can do is look at real clothing. I suppose we all have a hoodie, and look where the seams are, and look how it's connected to the body and the neck. This kind of goes for everything inside Marvelous. The best thing you can do is look at real references that you have, or look at photos if it's something more complicated or something you don't really have in your wardrobe. And you can also look at some sewing patterns. There's a bunch of stuff online. Just type like sweater and then sewing pattern, and you'll see these like really intricate, like technical looking things. And if you kind of have to get used to looking at them before you can completely like understand what they're exactly saying. But you can kind of translate them into Marvelous. You probably won't be able to strictly just copy them, do the exact same thing, but you kind of have to understand it and translate it on how it will work in Marvelous. And that's a pretty good thing to do in general. If you're walking on the street and you see someone with cool clothing, just look at it. Don't look too long, because that's creepy. And try to kind of like in your head build it in Marvelous. I know a lot of 3D modelers do it in real life too. Just look at an object and think about like, how would I go over modeling this shape. So as you can see on the screen, I'm currently doing the animation part of Marvelous. from the T pose to our actual pose we made in DAZ. And the way you do it is just pressing the big record button you'll see on top of the timeline. This usually takes a while. It'll simulate the clothing like for every single frame you made. And I'll get back to you guys as soon as this is finished. Once you have your finished base for the clothing, it's time to get rid of those wrinkly looking folds, and the way you do it is, first of all, you save your file again, because Marvelous isn't the most stable piece of software, and especially when we up the particle distance, which we are going to do in a few seconds, Marvelous tends to crash sometimes. Hopefully it doesn't this time, but yeah, let's see. We'll start off by freezing some of these, and we'll focus on the underlying sweater. So let's select all of them, and this window should pop up, and under simulation properties you'll see particle distance, and this is basically how dense the mesh is and how dense your polygons are. So if we, let's say, double it, and double is actually going half, so if you go to 10, the polygons will double, and press enter. It'll take a while. Hopefully again it doesn't crash, and it looks like it's good. And then press spacebar to make it simulate and get rid of those wrinkly lines, and we'll do the same for the bigger sweater again. And if if it doesn't get rid of every little thing you don't like. We'll take it to ZBrush and you'll be able to smooth some stuff out that you don't like, or if you want some more wrinkles somewhere, just sculpt it in ZBrush and you'll be good to go. So we'll do the same for the sleeveless shirt. Let's freeze these now. Okay, and unfreeze those. Select them all again and go for particles, go to 10. Okay, looks good. Now we'll jump into exporting and how I like to do it. Now first of all, let's unfreeze everything. And the way I like to export things is by selecting everything and then exporting those separately. So we have a bunch of different OBJ files that we can import into ZBrush, and when we import them, like all of the different OBJs will become different subtools. So for example, I want this sleeveless jacket to be a different subtool than the clothing underneath. So if we just select all of this, go to File, Export, and OBJ selected, go to our files, say new marvelous clothing, and sleeveless right here. So again, I recommend you just copying everything, except for the scale. Now the scale works this way. If you put it to 2500, that means it used to be 100%, and you multiplied it by 25 to get 2500. So when you export it, you want to, how do you say it in English? Divide it by 25. So for example, if you set the scale when you import everything to 5000, that means you multiply by 50. You want to divide it by 50 when you export it again, so that'll be 2. So it's a bit of math, but it's pretty easy. And press OK. And do the same for this clothing. Now, I kind of want the sleeves to be separate from the main body, because we'll be able to work around this area a bit easier. So if we just say, I want all of these, and these separately. I took a quick screenshot in Marvelous Designer, so we can sketch on top of those again before we jump into ZBrush. This one is the closest one to our original sketch, and I think also the one we are gonna use for our to go further. Now this is all just very simple. Again, if you need to show this to a client, you might want to do a better job at this, but this is all just quickly pushing ideas out of your head and see what kind of works. Again, as I said, I still prefer this one the most. I added like little things, but it's mainly the exact same as our original sketch. These cut lines are pretty fun to work with. It's actually my favorite part of the design process, and it's all a pretty subtle game where you this one has a completely different feel than this one, mainly because these ones are curved and this is all like straight lines combined. But you can have a lot of fun with this. You can obviously make much more than 3 and what I did here. But it's just to show you that it's always good to make screenshots, jump back into Photoshop or anywhere, and sketch on top to see if it would still work or if you can come up with better ideas, which I wasn't able to do this time. But I've changed my mind a bunch of time while sketching. Just like previous programs, I'll be just going quickly over the UI in ZBrush for the people who don't know it. And I'll only be going over the stuff we'll be using today, so if you really want to get into ZBrush, check out some free YouTube tutorials or buy Gumroad from someone else that is like doing an intro to ZBrush. But for today, this is somehow what your UI in ZBrush will look like. You can customize the UI a lot, and I just stacked these buttons here and put some brushes on the bottom, but mainly it should look kind of the same. The first thing we will want to do, of course, is import all of our already made assets, so the pose and the clothing. The way we'll import it is go to this star icon on the right. If we press it and then go to import, we'll get our Windows Finder and go to our map, and now we will be importing the OBJ. So previously Marvelous we imported the FBX, now we'll start using the OBJ. So you'll see you have this OBJ thing, and if you drag it out, hold shift, it'll drag it out straight. You'll see your post dragged out. Now the way you edit it is either by pressing on this button or pressing the T icon. So if you press T, you'll be able to go around it just by clicking and dragging. If you hold shift, it'll snap, and if you hold alt, you will be able to drag it around. And for zooming, it's hold alt, click, release alt, and then drag it up or down. It's pretty complicated. It's overly complicated in my opinion, but if it's too much for the first time, just use these buttons. They do the exact same thing. What I also like to do when I just imported something is just lock this axis, because sometimes if you keep rotating it, you'll end up with strange angles, and if you hold this, you'll only be able to use kinda easy angles. This is when you're like really sculpting things, this is pretty handy, but for what we do, we don't really need to get into all the creases. The next thing I like to is put on the floor, so we have our a better understanding of where we are, and put on the perspective. So the next thing I like to do is change the matte cap. This is the standard matte cap. It isn't that good. Some people really like it. I personally don't. You can download a lot of matte caps online, and so if you press this icon, you can change it to anything. I've downloaded a bunch of them, like on ZBrush Central and the official ZBrush website, and I really like this one. But I think the basic material and all those are pretty good. These come standard with ZBrush. You just kind of want to check around and see what you like. But for me, I kind of like this one. So the next thing we do is import the rest of our clothing. So we go back to the star icon, press it twice, go to import, and then first of all we'll import the body, do the same thing again for the sleeves, and the same thing for the sleeveless jacket. So now we have all of these. We want these clothes all to be in one file. So these are Z tools. We all want them to be in the same Z tool. So how we do it is just by pressing subtool, and you'll get a list of all the subtools. It's kind of like the layers in Photoshop, but not really. And we can either append or insert them. If you go to insert, you'll be able to see the rest of your Z tools. So just insert all of them, and this is what we have. So as you can see, it's not perfect. We have some of the stuff colliding with our body, and this is just the problem Marvelous has, because it only registers points and not really the polygons. So we'll just like pull them out with the move brush. But before we do those, if you just click on them, you'll select them. Before we do those, we kind of want to weld the points together. So because we have some thickness to our clothing, as you can see, you kind of have to think of it as a cube, and you want all the 6 sides of the cube to be together. You don't want them separate from each other. So if we go over this right now and we start smoothing it, you'll see they separate from each other, which is not what we want. So just press Ctrl Z, and we will want to weld those together, and the way you do it is just go to Geometry, Modify Topology, and Weld Points. So now we have the sleeveless jacket, and if we smooth it now, they'll properly stay together like we want them to. If you just want to select different subtools, you just press Alt and then click on it, and then you'll be able to select those instead of always going back to the subtool menu and selecting them there. So we do the same thing again, weld points and weld points for the sleeves. So the next thing we'll do is we'll kind of push everything out so it sits on top of our body like we want it to be, and we'll do it with the move brush. If you don't have these brushes on the bottom, you just go right here and you press M for just to see all the brushes that starts with an M, and then you'll see move right here. So the way ZBrush works is you can drag stuff around, and if you want it inverted, you'll hold Alt and then it will push stuff in. So we'll go ahead and just grab our pen and start dragging everything out like we want it to. The next thing we will want to do is create our bodysuit. So as I said, we could have created it in Marvelous Designer, but it is a lot easier in ZBrush. The way we'll do it is by masking it out and then extracting it from the body. So the way you mask things is just by holding Control. So if we just select our body, you'll see you can mask things out. There's a bunch of different ways to mask. The one I like the most is using the mask lasso. It's just like the Photoshop lasso. You'll be able to mask things out. So we will want to remove our clothing for this part. So if you press the eye icons just like in Photoshop, they'll turn invisible. So we just go over our body and start selecting where we want the bodysuit to be. Now there's a thing that comes automatically with DAZ models, and that is different poly groups. So if you press this line and fill polyframe kind of button, it'll show all your poly groups. And what we want to do is select the waist without selecting the hand. So if we would try it like this, it would select the fingers, and we don't really want any bodysuit to be there. So we kind of want to hide the hand for just this part. And the way you select different poly groups is by holding Control and Shift and just pressing on a poly group, and it'll only show that one. So we just select everything here and we're good to go. Now I kind of want the bodysuit to go right up to the jaw, like I did with the previous sports girls. So right up here, go down. And we want to give it a little bit more than it actually needs to, because cutting away in ZBrush is much easier than adding to something. So this looks kind of good for the bodysuit, I suppose. Maybe the hand would be like this. Yep, looks good to me. So we will want to extract like a thickness, add a thickness to this masking. And the way we do it is go to, in the subtool menu, go to extract. And here we can set a thickness and a smoothness and all that stuff, but we will want to disable double, so we will only go outside and not inward. So if you have double selected, it will add a thickness to the outside and a thickness to the inside, but we don't really want it to go inside. So if we just press extract, you'll see how thick it is right now. It's way too thick, obviously, so we'll move it down a bit. Let's see what this does. This looks a bit better, but might be still too thick, yeah. This looks more like what I want. So if you have this, just press accept, and you'll have your bodysuit. To stop, to deselect the mask, you just make a mask outside of your model, and it will become unmasked. The same for the body, is still masked where we masked it before. Just unmask it and we're good here. So as I said, we will want to cut out like some of this shape right here because it doesn't look that good. And the way we do it is by pressing Control Shift, and this is the current brush we have, but we will want to change it to Trim Curve. And then release Control Shift and press it again, and you'll be able to drag a line out of this. Hold space to move it, and Alt to make a curve. So if we do something like this, it'll cut where we wanted it to be. So it's kind of uneven at the moment, and we don't really want that. So let's try again. Even more uneven. One more time. Well, good enough. We'll use the move brush to get it in again, and just a bit more. Alright, so let's make the previous clothing visible again, and we have the same issue we had before, so we'll have to move everything out of it again. Now the nice thing is that we will only be making one single image that is from the front, so we can make some errors on the back. No one will see it. If you're working for a client or doing some orthographic like turnarounds for your portfolio, you will want to spend like more time on the back and make sure that you don't have this colliding stuff going on. But for just one image from the front, it doesn't matter, no one will ever see it. And that's the nice thing about being a concept artist. Now comes the fun part, the sculpting on top, like making everything look way more detailed than it actually is. And I've included a text file in the download for Gumroad, which gives you a link to some brushes we'll be using that will create some interesting seams. So you'll have it like in your brush palette. And the ones I like to use are these, so let's quickly show them off. Now one thing about these brushes is you will need like a really dense mesh, because as you can see, this is not how it should look. So the way we subdivide this mesh is just by going to geometry and press divide. You can see on the top how many points it has. We'll probably have to divide one more time. Yeah, you're starting to see what it looks like, but we'll just divide it one more time just to be sure. So we have 5 million points at the moment, and the way you change the size of your brush, just hold space. This menu will pop open and you'll be able to change the size. And this is the brush I use the most. I have 3 others. This is more of a quick seam and a dirty seam that isn't as clean and well done as the previous one. And then I have a teared seam like this, and I also have like one brush that you can create some extra folds with if you want to sculpt some more on top of this. Now something else you'll do is by holding shift you can smooth things out like this. So if you see some areas where the polygons are really visible, you can just smooth it out. It's very subtle, but you will notice it at the end. I mean, on the sleeves it's probably the most notable how you can see the polygons. So let's just quickly divide them. Let's do it twice, just like the previous one, and just smooth everything out so it becomes a lot smoother. Go back to the move, push it out a little bit, and keep on smoothing everything. So the next thing we will want to do is use those brushes. We'll be using like the clean seam because it's first of all my favorite, and we'll just drag it alongside the edges of all our clothing. So if you just take a piece of clothing, if you look at what you're wearing at the moment, it'll probably have some seams like at the edges of everything almost. So if we just click on the eye icon again, all the rest will become invisible, and we'll go ahead and just drag our brush alongside the edge. Now if you want it to be more intense and come out a bit more, you can just press space just like you did for the size and make it more intense. So as you can see, it makes more relief. So just keep doing this. Just looking at this now, we might want to even divide it one more time. The more you divide, the denser it will become, and of course the heavier it will be for your PC. So we have 20 million points at the moment, which will be, yeah, this is a lot better for the clarity of the scene. Again, for the back side, if you really want to make it clean and everything, you go there, but we will be just doing a front shot, so we can kind of ignore the back side and just make sure everything looks good in front. Now the next thing we will want to do is go back to our sketch and look at how we divided and made some seam lines in those, and we'll just copy them. So we make those so we can make different render passes in KeyShot or whatever render engine you want to use, and then mask them out in Photoshop. So let's have a quick look at our sketches. So we have this on the top of the chest, so let's quickly make that. Okay. The next thing we will want to do is add some of the texture to our clothing. Now, I like to do this in ZBrush for no particular reason. If you want to do this in KeyShot or any other render engine, fine. I just prefer it in KeyShot. Again, I have no reason for liking it in KeyShot, but liking it in ZBrush, but yeah, the way you do it is just select the piece of clothing, go to surface, right here, press noise, and you'll get to see your piece of clothing, and there's a bunch of options here. It'll automatically do a noise surface to it, but we don't necessarily want it, so we just put it to 0 and it will go away. So what we want to do is work with alphas, and you can just go on Google Images and find some cool images. Just press cloth and then alpha map or bump map or anything, or you can make them yourself. So what they look like is something like this. I have a pretty big collection of them. Let's look for something that will work. Like stuff like this is kind of what you want to look for, but not necessarily what I want to use today. And this is coming pretty close. Yes, this is what I want. So you can scale it, of course, by changing the alpha scale, and just like with the brush, you can change the intensity by switching up the strength. So let's scale it down and see what it does at the moment. So this is what it looks like right now. Um, this is not actually baked into the geo yet. If we sculpt on top of this, we can perfectly do everything as we normally would without ruining our texture. But once we have our sculpt finished and we want this to be actual geometry, we just press apply to mesh, and usually it loses some of its crispness, but this time it looks like it's alright. If you feel like it's not like intense enough, you can either go back and change the intensity or just press noise again and apply it a second time. But we're pretty good for what we want, so let's do this for the rest of all this clothing. In this upcoming part, I'll be using the same techniques as I showed you before. I'm just masking stuff out, extracting it to create some kind of like pockets, and I'm also doing it, if any of you guys own a baseball or basketball jersey, you'll see this like official NBA or what's it called for baseball, MLB, I think. So they have these official tags, and that's kind of just the purpose of that one. But the thing I wanted to talk about is with a little knowledge and a few techniques, you can do a lot, and that's kind of like what I prefer in software. That's something I look for, and that's also why I like using Keyshot. It's not the best piece of render software, but it's so easy, and just by knowing a few things, you can go a long way. And the same goes for ZBrush. I don't know half of these menus that are on the screen, but I feel like I can I know enough to do what I have in my head, to show my vision. And the same thing goes for Marvelous. You don't have to know a lot in Marvelous. There is a lot to know though, but if you just want it for concept art and just want it to use to show other people your vision and to showcase your design, you don't have to know a lot of things. So once we have our finished sculpt, we will start exporting all of our assets. First of all, we're not going to export our human figure because we already have it as an OBJ. So this one we don't really need. So let's start with the bodysuit, go to export and find our map again. We'll just make a new map that says parts or assets, and then just save everyone separately. I am just done importing everything into Keyshot. If you don't know how to do it, just simply go to File, Import, and then import all of your OBJs. Same for the DAS model, use the OBJ, not the FBX. Now let's quickly go over some ways we can render in Keyshot. It's super straightforward. It's a really simple piece of software. Now, as you can see, all of my imported OBJs are on the right. We have all the materials that come with the DAS model, and on the left we have the materials that come standard with Keyshot. We have some environments that we can use for different lighting, and I'm using Keyshot 6 right now, and we will be using some materials to create some point lights. So let's get into this. As you can see, when you import everything, it will either be blue or black if it doesn't have any material to it. So let's quickly give it a material. I like to use paint materials, so let's just assign every material, just drag and drop it on your model and it'll be alright. Now for the camera itself, we can of course change the length of it. It's by default set to 35mm, but I like to go a bit higher. It will make stuff less deformed. And let's quickly look for a good composition. Not that there is much of a composition with just a character shot, but this will work just fine. We can lock the camera by just clicking on camera and pressing right click, toggle lock. I usually make a few ones just to be sure, because they can unlock sometimes without you knowing it. So it's good to be safe. Now we have our camera set, and we can go into giving these some of our materials that we want. For the skin, I like to go with a translucent one, and if you press Alt while dragging materials on top of your models, they will keep the texture while changing the materials itself. So if we just drop this on there, it'll become translucent and it has some subsurface scattering in it. This is a material a friend gave to me, so I don't feel comfortable giving it away, but it's fairly easy. This is not a video about skin shaders, and I personally think if you want to get into skin shaders, Keyshot isn't the best program, and it's a big rabbit hole to get into. It's so subtle and complex. So this kind of works as basic. You can use the one that comes with Keyshot if you want to. It's pretty alright, but again, if you really want realistic skin, prepare yourself to get a lifetime worth of playing around with sliders and all that stuff. So again, just hold Alt while dragging it on there and you will retain your textures. For the eyelashes, we can just click on them, and you see here, double click, and we want the opacity. You just go to your maps that come with the DAS model, double click them and make sure to set them to UV coordinates, and you'll have nice eyelashes. For the eyes itself, the DAS model comes with a eye moisture, so it has some kind of like wet membrane around your eye like it is in real life. We do the same thing for this, but we go to a glass material that comes with KeyShot and just also hold Alt and just drag it on top of there, and now you can see through the eyes. I think the eyes never look too good in KeyShot, and we'll just paint on top of them and see what they this kind of like use it as a base, see what it gives us. It doesn't give us a great result, but again, paint on top of it and you'll be good to go. Now for the colors itself, it's just go to double click it, you'll get the material and you can just pick a color. Again, I'm not too sure which colors to use. If you want to, you can look for an image that on Google or anywhere where you do like the colors and just open them on a second monitor or just in a separate window, press a color and use the color picker to go and pick something off a photo or off a sketch you made. That's always a good idea. But I'm gonna play around with these colors and I'll get back to you guys as soon as I find something that kind of works. I decided to go with the same colors as the green and yellow one. I could have like looked for maybe better color combination, but this is just what we'll work with today. Now the only thing that's left to do here is work on the lighting. I also, by the way, worked with slided some of this around to get some different roughness. Usually like work around 0.2. The thing is, if you made your texture kind of feel in ZBrush, it will also add a bit to the roughness, just because it's a little bit grainy. But for the lighting itself, I like to go for just a basic HDRI. I again downloaded a bunch of them, but for this video we'll be using one that comes standard with KeyShot. When it comes to HDRIs, I don't really like the look they give us, and I just like to put them like really dark and really low contrasty. So if we just do something like this, maybe a bit more contrast, maybe a bit brighter, and then just get rid of the background, give it some gray color, and now the thing we want to do is close all these just to be a bit more organized. We want to go to edit and add geometry, and then just add one of these basic primitives. I like to add spheres, but it doesn't really matter. And what we'll do with these is we'll give it an emissive material, which means they just give off some lighting. Let's quickly look at this one. I usually go for 3, maybe 4 light sources, and I go pretty top heavy, just go for something that's directly above it, give it an material and just add some of the slider of power. This is clearly not enough, so let's say 50,000. This is pretty strong, especially if we keep on adding more to it, but I think we need to get a bit more of the HDRI. So I kind of use the HDRI as an ambient source of lighting, and then use the spheres as a direct lighting, and then I just copy and paste, and move them around until I get a cool like play of different lights. So duplicate and then position it, move it around to see what different lights can give me. You can you can change the color if you want some cool like backlight that is maybe blue, and then a top light that is orange, if you want to go like all Michael Bay on this. But we'll keep it pretty subtle today, I think. I fixed the lighting, and now we can start to render. We just press render at the bottom. We'll have this option menu. You can choose where the file is gonna go. You can change the name, of course, and then you can go for JPEG or PNG. I switch between these two. Let's go for PNG today. If you include alpha, it means that the background will be transparent, so you won't have to cut it out or anything, which is pretty handy. And then for the passes, I like to just render all the depth paths. I don't really use for characters, but geometry and clown paths is pretty handy. Just look out for geometry, it will render as an EXR. And you'll have to download a plugin for Photoshop to be able to open them, I think. It used to be like when I started, it might be in the new like CC version that you don't have to download it anymore, but if you have an older version, I'm pretty sure you have to download the plugin. Now for the resolution, I kind of go back and forth. I mean, especially when you work for clients, you might want to go at a low resolution when you're on a tight deadline, but if they ask for a certain resolution, make sure to just pick that one. But let's say, so this is width, this is height, let's say 4K for the height, because we'll be working at a vertical format for this one. And press render, and I'll see you guys after this one is done. Alright, so I just finished this piece. Like I might spend like 10 more minutes on it or something, but it's mostly finished, and I noticed I haven't recorded anything that I did in Photoshop. But the thing is, I can quickly explain like how I combine my my render passes, and the rest is all just painting on top and photo bashing some stuff in. So we'll quickly go over how I combine these render passes in a different file, because I really can't bring myself to do this all over again just to get it recorded. And I'll just explain what I did, and this is all pretty easy, if I'm honest. So let's just jump to our render passes. I'll tell you which ones I made and how I combined them. As you guys saw, I changed the colors from what I originally started as. I was rendering everything in Keyshot, and I kind of changed my mind while doing it, and I gave them some different colors, just because I think these are more original and might work better for what we did. So this is the main beauty pass, kind of what I will work on top as, and then I've created a bunch of different renders that we'll be using. So the first one is an ambient occlusion map. This is just in Keyshot, drag the ambient occlusion material on top of it and you'll have this pass. The way I use it is put it on multiply, and that'll do the trick. Multiply. Oh, I put the wrong thing on multiply. So you do this, and I kind of crush the levels a bit. So put this all the way to there, and then just slide it in, and you'll see where you kind of want it to be. Something like this, maybe. And I usually put this one on the very top. And then for the clothing itself, I also rendered this thing. And what we want to do with this thing is make the gradient that I do in a lot of clothing, from the bottom to the top. And this is why we use this pass. This is the clown pass, where we can easily just select different materials by using the magic wand. So if we select this, put a mask on it, then we'll have it like fully selected. And then I usually press Control and click on the thumbnail, and then you'll select all the white parts, make it black again, and now we still have deselection. Press Control H to hide it, and then we just mask it in with a soft brush like this. And I do this for all the different areas. I use these for masking in those more angular pieces of the clothing. And then the next thing is something I don't see too many people use. These are just a shiny paint material, a black one, that I drag through different HDRIs, so we have different lighting casting upon them. And what we do with these is we put them on color dodge, and if we deselect these, you can see it only extracts the highlights from our pass, and then we just double click it and we can kind of like see where we want them to fit in. And of course just mask it and paint it in. And this is just so you have a lot more form definition. I think it's important to remember that whenever we paint, it's easily to get distracted by design and by composition and lighting, but you just have to remember we're just describing 3D forms, and it doesn't matter which technique you use, whether you use 3D photo bashing or painting, you're still just describing forms. And maybe the lighting isn't as accurate this way, but you are describing a form more clearly to maybe the guy that come after you in the pipeline when you're working on video games or movies. And that's kind of like my whole process. I just combine all these different render passes, and then I start painting on top, photo bashing on top. The thing I do is I really destroy these edges, because these edges give away that it's like really 3D. So if we go to the finished design, you can see I have a little bit of like tear to the edges. Maybe it's a bit overdone, it might very well be. And the same thing I did for these like small eyelets. Just paint on top this cut line. It's just all painting. Strings are painted. And for the presentation itself, I like to just go for gray background and then start with a darker gradient from the top and do the opposite for my character. So I just clip it to my character and make a multiply layer and push him shadow from the bottom, so you have these opposites working together. And that's kind of all there is to it in Photoshop. I think you guys probably have some experience with combining render passes in Photoshop, and you can do it your way, because I think my way might have some flaws, and I'm still developing, of course, my own technique. So we're finished. I hope every single one of you learned something new, whether it was about these techniques or about me rambling about design and design philosophy. As you can see, I've still changed like little bits of this this piece, but yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed. I'm so sorry for losing the Photoshop footage, but as I said, it's pretty straightforward, and I suppose everyone is very comfortable inside Photoshop and knows how to mask stuff out, and knows how these layer modes work. And for the final thing, I still like liquefied some of the shapes just to get like a bit of a better pose, and to change the structure of the face. But this is it, guys. Thank you so much for buying and watching this tutorial. Again, if you want a quick review, or if you have some technical issues, add me on Facebook, send me a message. I'll be sure to reply to you as soon as I can. And have fun. I completely forgot to mention, if you have some feedback on this whole Gumroad tutorial, or if you have some tips for me that I can maybe introduce into my workflow, make sure to also send me a message on Facebook. I'm not sure if I'll be making another Gumroad tutorial. As I said, this technique is kind of the same for fantasy, sports, futuristic, kind of like modern looking stuff. It's all the same. But if you guys have anything that you would like to see from me, make sure to send me a message on Facebook.